It was raining the day my daughter kicked me out. Not the kind of gentle rain that taps on windows like a lullaby, but the kind that soaks you through your coat before you realize you're even cold. I remember the weight of the water more than the weight of the bag I carried. It was just a tote old and soft with a hand-knitted scarf poking out something I had made for Evan last Christmas. He had told me he liked the color blue because it felt safe. I held on to that scarf as the door slammed behind me. Caroline didn't shout. She didn't even look angry. Her voice was flat, like she was reading a weather report. She just said, "Mom, you're too loud. You're always interrupting. Evan can't concentrate when you're hovering like that." I tried to explain. I had just brought him a glass of warm milk. He had looked tired during his online class, rubbing his eyes and slouching forward. I didn't say anything to him, didn't break his focus. I just placed the glass on the desk and stepped out. That's all it took. She didn't want to hear it. She told me I needed to leave. "Maybe it's time you found your own place again," she said. "We've all been tense lately. You need space. We need space." I looked down at the floor. There was nothing of mine in the house anymore. No shoes by the door, no tea mugs in the cabinet, not even my scent on the cushions. I had already made myself small and visible. I hadn't realized I had disappeared completely. I asked if I could at least wait inside until the rain let up. She gave me a tight smile and told me it wouldn't be long. Then she shut the door behind me. So I stood outside the rain, pressing down on my shoulders like an old regret. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. But there was only a kind of numbness, an ache too quiet to scream. In my coat pocket was a check. $30,000. I had taken it out of my savings the week before, intending to gift it to Caroline and her husband. Their roof was leaking and the repairs were going to be expensive. She had never asked me directly, but I had overheard them arguing late at night. I thought helping would bring me closer to them again. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I gave enough, I'd be allowed to stay. Not as a burden, as family. I didn't hand her the check. I left it behind on the hallway table without a word. I didn't want it to buy anything anymore. I walked down the street with soaked shoes and quiet steps. The scarf I had knitted for Evan was still tucked under my arm. It had his name stitched into one end, messy and imperfect. I had meant to give it to him this winter. Instead, I held onto it like it was the last piece of him I could take with me. No one stopped me. No neighbors asked if I was okay. I was an old woman with a wet bag and sagging shoulders, just part of the scenery. They say when you get old, you turn invisible. I didn't believe it until that day. But silence has its own kind of weight. My daughter said I was too loud, that I disrupted her world, that I didn't fit anymore. She had no idea that my silence would become the loudest thing she'd ever hear. My name is Martha Lynn. I am 67 years old, a widow, a retired nurse, and until recently I was a grandmother who believed that love and sacrifice were enough to hold a family together. I met my husband Robert in 1975. He was calm, kind, and had the kind of laughter that made even bad days feel soft. We were married for 23 years before cancer took him in less than 6 months. When he passed, Caroline was just 17. She had always been ambitious, driven, stubborn like her father, but with more fire. I was proud of that fire. I thought it would keep her warm in a cold world. I raised her alone after Robert died, worked double shifts in the emergency room, packed her lunches with little notes inside, stayed up with her when she studied late, even when my feet ached from being on them for 16 hours straight. I told her she could be anything, and she believed me. She got a scholarship to a top university, married young to a man in finance, and moved into a sleek house with crown molding and a backyard made for barbecues. I was happy for her. Honestly, I was. When Evan was born, she called me crying, overwhelmed, terrified. Her husband had taken on a new job out of state and couldn't be around much. She didn't trust daycare, didn't have time to figure it out. I offered to help. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. I moved into the guest room. It wasn't large, but it was clean and quiet. I kept my things out of sight, made sure to wash my own laundry separately cooked when asked, disappeared when not needed. I thought I was being respectful. I thought I was doing the right thing. I helped raise Evan from the time he was in diapers. I sang him lullabies, taught him to brush his teeth in little circles, held his hand when he got his first vaccine. When he had night terrors at 4, I was the one who sat beside his bed whispering stories until his breathing steadied. But as Caroline's world grew busier and shinier, mine faded into the background. She stopped saying thank you. Then she stopped asking. Then eventually she started treating me like I had simply come with the house, like the baseboards or the smell of old books. She would roll her eyes when I reminded Evan to say please. She would correct me in front of him if I let him watch cartoons for too long. She'd snap if I talked too much at the dinner table. "You're overstepping, Mom," she'd say. Or worse, "You're making things harder than they need to be." I didn't want to believe what was happening. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, to ignore the small humiliations, to brush off the passive-aggressive comments, to stay silent every time she made me feel like a guest in a life I had built. But I noticed how Evan changed. He used to run to me, arms outstretched, calling Gran. He used to sneak into my room with his stuffed animals, saying he slept better next to someone who didn't keep checking her phone. Then he stopped coming in. Then he started asking permission to talk to me. Then one day he asked me if it was true that I didn't have real money. I laughed it off. But I couldn't stop hearing it in my head. I realized he was starting to absorb the same quiet disdain his mother had learned from the world. That if someone wasn't rich or productive or useful in a visible way, then they didn't count for much. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. That maybe Caroline was just stressed. That maybe she didn't mean it when she said I was too intense or too involved. That maybe this was just the way things went when parents got old. But deep down, I knew. I knew she had stopped seeing me as someone she loved. She saw me as someone she tolerated. And still, I stayed. Because I loved Evan. Because I had nowhere else to go, not really. My old apartment had mold, the kind that creeps behind drywall and makes your lungs ache. I had moved in with them because I thought it would be temporary. I thought they wanted me there. Caroline said it would be nice for Evan to grow up with family. I didn't know that in her mind, family came with an expiration date. The irony was, I had more than enough saved to live elsewhere. I had been careful. 30 years of nursing, modest living, no vacations, no impulse buys. I had even made a few lucky investments in healthcare stocks before retirement. But I never flaunted any of it. I never wanted my money to be a tool. I just wanted to be wanted. But wanting something doesn't make it yours. The day she told me I was too loud, too much, too, in the way I finally understood something I hadn't let myself admit in years. My daughter loved the idea of me soft, silent, safe. But not the reality. Not the woman who spoke up. Not the woman who still had opinions. Not the woman who, despite her wrinkles and arthritis and aching knees, was still alive in every sense of the word. And so she silenced me. She pushed me out. She closed the door. And I walked away. But not because I was defeated. Because I was finally awake. It happened on a Thursday. Evan was home attending school, virtually. His headphones were too big for his small head, constantly slipping to one side as he tilted forward to focus on his laptop. I had been watching from the hallway unnoticed, smiling to myself. He looked so much like his mother did at that age, determined, curious, fidgety. I walked into the kitchen and warmed up a small pot of milk. It was something I used to do for Caroline when she had trouble sleeping before her exams. Just a bit of milk, a dash of cinnamon, and a quiet gesture of care. Evan had mentioned earlier that his head hurt, so I thought the warmth might help. I didn't say a word as I stepped into his room. I placed the cup on his desk gently on the far edge so it wouldn't spill. He didn't even notice. He was too focused on the math problem his teacher had just assigned. I smiled and turned around to leave. But Caroline saw me. She had come out of her office, her home workspace, as she called it, holding her phone and a stack of folders. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me step out of Evan's room. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice clipped. "I just brought him some warm milk," I said quietly. He looked tired. I thought, "You thought she cut me off, that it was okay to interrupt him during class." "I didn't interrupt," I said. "I just set it down. You're always hovering, always inserting yourself. It's exhausting." "Mom." I stood there blinking. The hallway light buzzed above us. Rain had begun to tap against the windows. I could hear Evan laughing faintly from his room. His teacher had made a joke. "You always do this," she said louder now. "You barge into things. You make everything about you. I'm trying to run a household, manage work, raise a kid, and you just linger like some ghost from another era." Her words didn't hit all at once. They uncoiled slowly, wrapping around my chest, cold and familiar. I felt the echo of them in places I had long buried. I think she said with finality, "You should go." What I asked, not because I hadn't heard her, but because I needed her to say it again. I needed to be sure. "I think it's time you moved out," she said, crossing her arms. "You've been here for months. We've given you space. We've tried. But you make everything tense. You're too loud. You're always around. It's too much." "It's raining," I whispered. She didn't respond. "Caroline, can I at least wait until the storm passes?" She didn't look angry, just tired, bored, like she was ending a conversation she had mentally rehearsed for weeks. "You'll be fine," she said. And with that, she turned and walked back into her office, closing the door behind her. I stood in the foyer for a full minute, maybe more. The silence felt heavy, almost physical. I looked down at my shoes, old sneakers with worn soles. I had brought so little with me when I moved in, just the essentials. I hadn't wanted to intrude. I picked up my bag from the corner and slung it over my shoulder. It was already packed. Not because I had expected this, but because I had always felt the possibility humming under the surface like static. On the small hallway table sat the envelope I had prepared days ago, $30,000, a personal check written out to Caroline. No memo, no strings, just help. Just a mother's instinct to fix what was broken. I placed it on the table and turned toward the door. No one stopped me. No voice called out from upstairs. No footsteps hurried to intercept. Just the sound of rain and the quiet click of the door as I closed it behind me. Outside, the wind had picked up. My scarf whipped around my neck as I stepped off the porch and into the storm. The cold settled quickly into my bones. I didn't have an umbrella. I didn't think I'd need one. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. A calendar reminder. Evan's school project was due the next day. I had promised to help him paint the cardboard volcano. He had asked me to make it extra explodey like the one we'd seen on YouTube. I had bought red glitter and cotton balls and a tiny bottle of vinegar for the baking soda effect. That project would sit unfinished now, forgotten like the scarf, like me. I walked 3 blocks before my hands began to shake. My shoes were soaked through. Cars passed without slowing down. One of them splashed a small puddle across my legs. I didn't flinch. At the 4th block, I stopped under a bus shelter and sat on the cold metal bench. There was no one else around, just the hum of traffic and the white noise of rain. For a long time, I just sat there, clutching the edge of Evan's scarf, trying to feel something: anger, heartbreak, betrayal. But I felt nothing at all. Then slowly, something colder than the rain began to form inside me. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. I had spent so much of my life giving. To my husband, to my daughter, to patients, to strangers. I had built my worth around being needed, around being present, around being quiet. But now finally I heard the sound my silence made. It roared. I spent that night at Judith's. Judith was an old friend, one of the few who had seen me through every version of myself. We met during my second year at the hospital. She had been a nurse too, but left after 10 years to start a nonprofit focused on elder care advocacy. We stayed close, though our lives diverged. She had always called me the steel under the softness, even when I felt like nothing more than a paper towel holding back a flood. When she opened the door and saw me dripping wet holding a damp tote bag and trying not to fall apart, she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped me in a towel and poured a cup of tea. "You finally left," she said after a while, setting the mug in front of me. I didn't correct her, not that night. I didn't tell her I hadn't left, I had been thrown out. I didn't tell her about the milk, the scarf, the rain. I just sipped my tea and let the silence be enough. But the next morning, something in me woke up. Judith had gone out early for a meeting. I sat at her kitchen table with the sunlight coming in through the blinds and my laptop in front of me. The check I had left behind echoed in my mind, $30,000 gone. Not that the money mattered, it wasn't about that. What mattered was that I had offered love and was met with disdain. What mattered was that I had been erased from my daughter's world not with malice, but with apathy. People think cruelty is loud, but the most dangerous kind is quiet. The kind that comes with a smile and a closed door. I opened my banking app. My retirement fund was intact. My investments, especially the ones I had made 10 years ago in medical software and elder tech, had performed far better than I'd ever expected. I had options, more than Caroline had ever assumed. I wasn't poor, I wasn't powerless. They had just never cared enough to ask. I made a few calls, then a few more. I contacted a lawyer I had once helped during a medical case years ago. She remembered me. Her mother had died in our ICU, and I had stayed with her through the night when the machines fell quiet. "Anything you need," she said. Then I called the community center where Evan had once attended a summer science program. The director told me Evan wouldn't be eligible this year. There had been an internal decision to tighten the moral guidelines around participant families. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I knew where that decision had come from. Later that afternoon, Judith and I had lunch on her balcony. She brought out an envelope and placed it in front of me. "That idea we used to talk about," she said. "The one about starting a platform for elder voices. Let's do it." We launched the campaign in less than a week. It was called The Forgotten Elderly. The website featured photographs of real people, seniors, abandoned, silenced, ignored. No names, no blame, just stories, honest, raw, and unfiltered. And one of them was mine. There was a black and white photo of me sitting under a bus shelter holding Evan's scarf, the rain still fresh in my hair. A volunteer photographer from Judith's team had snapped the image the night I arrived. We captioned it, "She was told she was too loud." So she left. But the silence that followed was deafening. The story didn't mention Caroline. It didn't have to. The internet filled in the blanks. Someone found an old family blog post Caroline had written years ago, one that named me, praised me, included photos of Evan asleep in my lap. The connection was inevitable. I didn't intend to go viral, but we did. Within 10 days, the campaign had over 4 million views. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up, local news stations picked up the story. One evening, I sat on Judith's couch and watched a panel of morning show hosts discuss the epidemic of elder neglect in modern families, using our image as their backdrop. They didn't know my name, but they knew my silence. And more importantly, Caroline did too. The first message came quietly, a single text. "Did you post something?" I didn't respond. 3 hours later. "Why is Evan's school saying we're under review for ethical standing?" Still, I said nothing. That weekend, I created a private event. Not a protest, not a press conference, just a gathering. I booked a small local gallery, the kind with brick walls and skylights that made everything look warmer. I invited a few people. Not Caroline, not her husband, not the neighbors, just those who had always made me feel invisible old family friends, church acquaintances, the PTA mothers who had always looked past me at recitals. The event was called A Celebration of Quiet Women. I printed photos of myself with Evan, of moments no one else had seen, him sleeping on my chest as a baby, us planting tomatoes in the garden, the volcano we never got to finish. I had written captions in small, simple font. No pity, just truth. Evan didn't come. He didn't know. I hadn't reached out, but Caroline did. 3 days before the event, I received a voicemail. Her voice was tight, panicked. "Mom, are you doing this to punish me? I'm getting emails from people I haven't heard from in years. Evan's school is asking questions. This could ruin everything." I didn't reply, because it already had. The day of the event, Caroline showed up. Not with flowers, not with an apology. She wore her usual confidence like a tight dress, but I could see it fraying at the seams. She walked in and looked around at the framed photos, the warm lights, the quiet people reading stories of other women who had also been too much for their children. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just said, "This wasn't supposed to happen." I looked at her and said calmly, "Neither was being thrown out into the rain." She flinched. Then, softer than I expected, she whispered, "You hurt me." I tilted my head. "I hurt you. You didn't have to make it public," she said. "You didn't have to humiliate me." "No," I said, but I had to stop pretending I wasn't already being erased. Behind her, 2 women strangers nodded. Caroline didn't speak again. She left before the end. No goodbyes, no explanations. That night, after the guests were gone and the gallery was quiet, Judith and I sat on folding chairs near the back wall. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at the empty teacup in my hands and nodded. For the first time in a long time, I said yes. 2 days after the event, Evan showed up at Judith's doorstep. I didn't recognize him at first. He had a hoodie pulled over his head, his small hands gripping the straps of a backpack almost too big for his frame. Judith opened the door and turned to me, a question in her eyes. He looked up. "Hi, Gran." My throat tightened. I stepped forward, unsure of what to say. He looked exactly as he had the last time I saw him. Only now there was something different in his eyes. A kind of weight. A quiet I hadn't seen before. "I saw your picture," he said. "At school. Someone printed it out." I didn't know that was the night you left." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "I didn't know Mom told you to go. She told me you were tired, that you went home because you needed rest." I exhaled slowly, my hands still clenched at my sides. "I wanted to come sooner," he added. "But I didn't know where you went." Judith stepped aside, letting him in. He walked past the living room and into the small kitchen, dropping his bag by the table like he used to. He sat down at the exact chair he always had when we made cookies together. "Do you still have the volcano stuff?" he asked suddenly. "The glitter, the baking soda." I stared at him, stunned. "Because I still want to finish it, even if it's late." I didn't cry. Not then. But something in me broke open, something I had been holding shut for weeks. "I still have it," I said quietly. "Everything." He nodded and looked down. "Mom's mad," he whispered. "She says you embarrassed her." "But she embarrassed herself." I didn't know what to say. "She told me you were loud, that you made things hard." "But you're not loud, Gran. You're just alive." That night, Evan stayed over. Judith set up the guest room for him, and I sat beside his bed like I used to, listening to him breathe, watching the rise and fall of his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't ask to go home. And I didn't ask him when he would. The next morning, Caroline showed up. She looked different. No makeup, hair tied back, her coat too thin for the weather. She didn't knock right away. Just stood on the porch for a while, staring at the door like it might open itself. When I finally let her in, she looked past me and into the house. "I didn't know he came here," she said. I said nothing. "I was going to talk to you. Apologize. I didn't expect him to leave. He didn't leave, I said. He came home. She looked like she had been slapped. Her eyes blinked fast, her mouth twitching like she was trying to decide whether to argue or beg. I messed up, she said finally. Still, I stayed silent. You were always so steady, she continued, her voice cracking. And I took that for granted. I thought you'd always just be there. I thought that I wouldn't leave. I finished for her. She nodded. Well, I said softly, you were right. I didn't leave. I was thrown away. Her lip trembled. I told people you were tired, she said, that you needed space. You weren't wrong, I said. I was tired. Tired of proving I belonged in a house I helped build. Tired of being treated like a shadow. She wiped her cheek and pulled something from her coat. A folder. Inside were 3 documents. The first was an apology letter to me, typed, signed, and stapled to a second letter addressed to Evan. The third was a therapy intake form. Weekly sessions. 2 months completed. I know I can't undo what I did, she said. I know this won't fix everything. But I want to try. I want Evan to see me trying. I want him to know people can change. I took the folder but didn't speak. He asked me why you left, she added, and for the first time I told him the truth. That night I showed Evan the letter. He didn't say much. He just nodded and asked if we could build the volcano the next day. And we did. We used glitter and food coloring and a too small cardboard base. We laughed when it overflowed onto the table, and I pretended to scold him for getting vinegar on the floor. It was the best failure we'd ever built together. A week later, a sponsorship deal fell through for Caroline's company. The board cited recent negative press and values misalignment. It was quiet, but it was enough. She called me again this time, not asking for forgiveness, but for guidance. What do I do? She asked. You listen, I said. You stop speaking over people. You stop thinking silence means weakness. You stop measuring love in convenience. There was a pause. Do you think he'll forgive me? She asked. I didn't answer, because that wasn't for me to decide. Months passed. I didn't move back. Caroline began visiting Evan at Judith's once a week. They went for walks. Sometimes he'd come back and say, she's different now, and I'd just smile. Maybe she was. Maybe not. But I had changed too. One quiet morning while Evan was at school, I walked to the community garden near Judith's place. I brought tomato seeds, Evan's favorite. As I pressed them into the soil, I felt the sun on my back warm and forgiving. A woman nearby asked what I was planting. Resilience, I said. She laughed. I didn't, because I meant it. 6 months later, I opened the door to my own apartment. It wasn't large, but it was mine. There were plants on the windowsill, a kettle on the stove, a rocking chair near the bookshelves, and 2 pairs of slippers at the door. One for me and a smaller pair that Evan insisted we keep just in case. He came every weekend now, sometimes for a night, sometimes for 2. Caroline would drop him off with less tension in her face. She still hesitated at the doorstep, unsure whether she was welcome. I never made it easier for her. Not out of cruelty, but because trust once broken doesn't return on command. It grows slowly like old roots trying to find new soil. We were not the same mother and daughter anymore. That chapter had closed. But I was still a grandmother. And Evan, despite all of it, still loved me the way only a child can, completely, without conditions, without shame. He had started drawing again. Little sketches, doodles. One day, he handed me a folded piece of paper with 3 stick figures under a crooked roof. Above them, he wrote, "My real house." I didn't ask which figure I was. I already knew. One evening, as we sat on the porch with cups of hot cocoa, he asked me something quietly. Gran, why did Mom say you were too loud? I looked up at the fading light, the way the sky softened just before it surrendered to night. Because sometimes when people feel small inside, they think making others smaller will help, I said. It doesn't. But they try anyway. Were you ever mad at her? I thought about it. I was, I said. But anger is heavy, sweetheart, and I've carried enough in my life. He nodded as if that made sense to him. He reached for my hand. I don't think you're loud, he said. I think you just have a lot of love in your voice. I smiled. He stayed the night. I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching the way his chest rose and fell in sleep. There's a peace in that rhythm, a kind of music only grandmothers understand. Later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table alone. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I pulled out a notebook and began writing not a diary, not a letter, just thoughts. Fragments of all the things I wished I had said back then but now understood didn't need to be said out loud. I wrote, "You taught me that love without respect is just control. You showed me what it feels like to disappear in a house filled with people. You reminded me that silence is not the same as peace. And then underneath all of that, but my grandson taught me something else. He taught me that even when you are cast aside, love remembers the way back." I closed the notebook and set it beside the kettle. The next morning, I walked down to the corner bakery and picked up 2 croissants, Evan's favorite. I added a bottle of orange juice and a chocolate bar to the bag. As I stepped back into my apartment, I heard the sound of small feet running across the wood floor. He greeted me with a hug around the waist, messy hair, and sleepy eyes. "Do you think volcanoes get tired?" he asked. "Why would they?" "Because they hold so much for so long. And then when they finally let it out, everyone runs away." I knelt down and looked him in the eyes. "I think volcanoes don't get tired," I said. "They just wait for the right time to remind the world they're still alive." He nodded thoughtfully. "Like you?" I smiled. "Something like that." Later that week, Caroline sent me an email. Not a message, not a request, not a plea, just a short email that read, "I don't know if I deserve another chance. But I'm trying to earn it anyway. I hope that matters." I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things are better answered with time, with action, not words. Instead, I printed out the message and folded it into the same notebook where I'd written all my thoughts. I tucked it between the pages and wrote today's date on the cover. A new chapter. Not a return to the past. Not a redemption arc. Just something new. I didn't want revenge. I never did. What I wanted, what I claimed, was dignity. And I took it back piece by piece without raising my voice, without slamming a single door. I showed the world and my daughter that the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. And that truth, once spoken, doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes it only needs to be whispered and heard.